I still remember the smell of my mother's perfume in the living room that night, sharp and floral, almost covering the tension hanging in the air. I was 18, standing with my backpack half zipped, waiting for someone to say the argument had gone too far. Instead, my father's voice cut through the silence like glass. "You're holding us back. Corinna, don't call us again." The words felt unreal, like a line from a play I hadn't rehearsed for. My mother didn't flinch. She folded her arms, her lips pressed tight, and looked past me as if I was already gone. I searched her face for something: hesitation, regret, even a flicker of softness. There was nothing. I wanted to argue, to remind them of the years I'd tried to be the daughter they wanted: good grades, quiet dinners, no trouble. But standing there, I realized it wouldn't matter. Their decision was made long before tonight. I walked to my room, my legs shaking, and began packing. A single duffel bag was all I could manage: jeans, sweaters, a worn paperback I couldn't bear to leave behind. The house was too quiet, only the creak of floorboards beneath my weight. No one followed me. No one stopped me. When I stepped outside, the Nebraska night slapped me with its dry cold. My breath came out in white clouds as I walked down the driveway, the family house glowing behind me like it belonged to strangers. I didn't know where to go, only that I couldn't stay. I found a studio apartment the next day, walls thin enough to hear the neighbors fighting through them. The carpet was stained, and the radiator rattled all night. I picked up shifts at a grocery store, bagging items until my back ached, then cleaned offices after hours just to afford rent. At night, I lay in the narrow bed staring at the cracked ceiling, the silence pressing down until tears blurred my vision, the sound of other people's lives, laughter through walls. Footsteps above me made the loneliness sharper. I told myself I wouldn't break, that I'd find a way to keep going, even if I had no one to call family anymore. That night was the first lesson in living alone, and it marked the beginning of 10 years of silence that would shape everything to come. The years slipped by, one after another, each one marked not by family milestones, but by absence. At first, I tried to reach them. I sent birthday cards, Christmas packages, even handwritten letters filled with updates about my classes and the small victories of my early 20s. Most came back unopened, the envelopes stamped "Return to Sender." The sight of my own handwriting circling back to me was worse than any curse. By the second year, I stopped expecting a reply. Still, I couldn't stop myself from dialing their number on holidays. Just to hear the hollow ring before the machine picked up, I would sit with the receiver pressed to my ear, imagining what I might say if someone answered. Eventually, I hung up without leaving a message. Meanwhile, their lives carried on. I'd see glimpses in the local paper or on social media through mutual acquaintances, my parents smiling at charity galas, celebrating anniversaries with matching champagne glasses, posing in front of the house they had remodeled after I left. They looked like a family that had never been missing a piece. I wasn't mentioned, not once. So I turned inward. I worked too. Sometimes 3 jobs at a time: grocery store clerk, diner waitress, night janitor. The paychecks were small, but I saved every dollar I could. Night school classes filled the hours when exhaustion threatened to swallow me. I studied business and accounting, believing knowledge might be my way out of the cycle. Birthdays passed with a slice of store-bought cake, eaten alone in my apartment. Christmas mornings meant working extra shifts while families shopped or traveled. I learned to find comfort in small things: a kind smile from a stranger, a used book that carried someone else's notes in the margins, the quiet pride of paying rent on time. 10 years built themselves out of silence and stubborn survival, each one layering resilience over the raw wound my parents had left. And somewhere in that silence, the foundation of the person I would become was quietly taking shape. It happened almost by accident. One morning, while sipping cheap coffee before work, I noticed a foreclosure listing in the classifieds. The picture was grainy, showing a run-down duplex with peeling paint and overgrown weeds. The price was low enough to make me pause. I tore out the page and carried it folded in my pocket all day, the numbers circling in my mind as I rang up groceries and wiped down counters. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and a pad of paper. I added up my savings, the few thousand I had managed to hold on to after years of scrimping, and realized barely that I could make it work. I applied for a modest loan, half expecting to be laughed out of the bank. But when the papers slid across the desk and I signed my name, something inside me shifted. For the first time since leaving home, I was choosing to build rather than just endure. The duplex became my second job. After finishing my shifts, I would drive over with tools I barely knew how to use. I scraped paint until my arms ached, patched holes in walls, and learned how to stop a leak by watching tutorials late at night. It was exhausting. But unlike my other jobs, this work gave me something I could see, slowly. The place transformed. When I rented the units out, the first rent checks felt heavier than cash should, as if they carried proof of my worth. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was creating something stable with my own hands. That duplex led to another small property, then another. Each one carried a lesson. Each one gave me a little more confidence. With every signed lease, the silence my parents left behind grew a little less suffocating. I was still alone, but the walls I built and the roofs I repaired stood as reminders that I didn't need their approval to keep moving forward. And without realizing it, I was laying the foundation for a future they could neither predict nor control. It was a gray Tuesday when my life turned on its head. I'd stopped at a corner gas station after work, too tired to cook and craving a microwaved sandwich. At the counter, I added a lottery ticket almost as an afterthought, sliding a crumpled bill across the counter. I didn't even check the numbers that night. The ticket sat forgotten on my refrigerator until the next week when the news reported no one had claimed the prize. On a whim, I pulled it down, squinting at the numbers under the kitchen light. One by one, they matched. My knees nearly buckled. $7 million. For a long moment, I just sat on the floor, ticket trembling in my hands, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I thought of all the nights I'd scraped by on coffee and determination, of the duplexes I'd patched with bleeding hands, of the birthdays spent alone. And now this. But years of living on the edge had carved discipline into me. I didn't run out and buy a luxury car or a mansion. Instead, I called my banker, I spoke with an attorney, and I laid out plans as carefully as I had when I first calculated rent payments on that duplex. Money could be a gift or a weapon, and I knew better than to let it control me. When the local paper published a story about the quiet woman who struck it rich, I became a headline. Suddenly, old coworkers who hadn't spoken to me in years left messages. Acquaintances I barely remembered sent friend requests. Neighbors lingered at my mailbox, curious and smiling too widely. The noise was overwhelming. But I kept my circle small, unwilling to trade the peace I'd fought for. Then, one evening, as I was settling down with tea, the phone rang. I nearly let it go to voicemail until I glanced at the screen. The name froze me where I sat. Mom. The letters glowed in stark contrast, as if they had been waiting all these years for the right moment to appear again. I lifted the phone, my hands suddenly cold, and pressed answer. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Hearing her voice after 10 years was like being dragged backward into another life, one I thought I had buried. "Corinna," my mother said sweetly, her tone light, rehearsed. "We've missed you so much." The words were delivered as if the last decade had been a simple misunderstanding, as if I hadn't spent every holiday alone, as if she hadn't turned her back when I needed her most. I held the phone against my ear, steadying my breath. My father's voice came next, firm but almost cheerful. "We've been talking, and we think it's time. Thanksgiving is coming up. Why don't you join us for dinner? Family should be together." The word family caught in my chest, bitter and heavy. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "Funny how you call right after the paper ran my story." There was a pause, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Then my mother's laugh spilled out, brittle and forced. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be silly. We would have called anyway. It's just, well, the timing felt right." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. 10 years of silence. And now, just like that, they wanted me back at their table. I could feel the old ache tugging at me, the part of me that still wanted a mother's hug, a father's approval. But layered over it was something stronger: caution, clarity, and the steel I had earned the hard way. "All right," I said finally. "I'll come." The relief in their voices was almost too eager, a warmth that rang hollow. I hung up, the silence of my house returning like an old friend. I sat for a long while at the table, the phone still in front of me, already knowing that if I was going to step back into their world, I wouldn't do it empty-handed. I would go to Thanksgiving, but not for the reasons they thought. I would bring something of my own. The invitation lingered in my mind for days, echoing louder than it should have. Part of me wanted to believe they were sincere, that after all these years they had finally chosen me over pride, over appearances. But another part, the wiser part, kept whispering that I already knew the truth. So I picked up the phone one evening and dialed their number. My heart raced, but my voice stayed steady. "Mom, Dad," I began. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving, and I need to be honest. The lottery money, it's mostly gone." There was silence on the line, the kind that speaks louder than words. I pressed on, making my lie sound fragile, believable. I got caught up in some risky investments, online trading, cryptocurrency. I thought I was smarter than I was. What I have left barely covers my expenses. My father's voice came first, flat and clipped. "That's unfortunate." "Really? It is. But maybe it's better if you don't come this year. Focus on yourself. No need to put extra stress on anyone." My mother rushed in after him, her tone falsely sympathetic. "Yes, darling, you should take care of your health. These dinners can be overwhelming, and we wouldn't want you to feel embarrassed. Let's just wait until things are better." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle like stones in my chest. 10 years of silence, broken only by the scent of money. And now, with the illusion of wealth gone, I was already expendable again. The hurt was sharp, but beneath it was a current of power I hadn't expected. They had shown their hand. I didn't have to wonder anymore if the call had been about reconciliation or greed. The test had given me my answer. "I see," I said softly, my voice calm though my throat burned. "Thank you for being honest." We ended the call quickly, as if there had never been a decade of waiting behind it. I set the phone down and sat in the quiet, a strange mixture of grief and satisfaction weaving through me. They had confirmed everything I feared, and in doing so, they gave me something I hadn't had before: certainty, and with certainty came the resolve to look deeper, to see exactly what they had been hiding all these years. After that call, I couldn't let it go. Their words kept replaying in my head, not just the rejection, but the casual way they brushed me aside the moment they believed the money was gone. I needed to know what had really driven them to reach out after so many years. I started quietly, searching public records online. What I found was a trail of red ink. The house they bragged about in the paper was mortgaged to the hilt. Property tax payments had been delayed multiple times. Court filings showed 2 small lawsuits from unpaid contractors. Each document painted a picture that looked nothing like the perfect image they had projected for so long. The deeper I went, the uglier it became. Their names surfaced in business directories, tied to short-lived ventures that dissolved in debt. My mother had signed for loans she clearly couldn't repay. My father's name appeared in minutes from a community development board. where whispers of mismanaged funds and improper transfers hinted at more than sloppy bookkeeping. One article from years back suggested donations earmarked for a local park had somehow disappeared under his oversight. I sat at my desk with files spread around me, the weight of truth heavier than I expected. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had been building their own ruin all along, wrapping it in glitter for others to admire, piece by piece. I gathered the records, copies of mortgages, lawsuits, and notes from the community fund. It wasn't hard to find. They had left the evidence scattered in plain sight. Certain no one would ever bother to look, I slid everything into a neat folder and closed it with a quiet snap. If they wanted me at their Thanksgiving table, I would come, but I would not come as the desperate daughter they remembered. I would bring with me the story they had spent years trying to bury. The house looked just as I remembered, only dressed up for the holiday. Strings of lights glowed along the porch railings, and a wreath hung perfectly centered on the front door. When my mother opened it, her smile stretched wide, too polished to be real. "Corinna," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a performance than affection. "We're so glad you're here." My father appeared behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You look well. Money seems to agree with you." Inside. The dining room table was already set for a feast turkey. Stuffing, bowls of vegetables arranged like a magazine spread. I took my seat while they fussed over me, passing dishes with exaggerated enthusiasm, filling my glass before I asked. Their chatter never stopped, each compliment carrying a hidden barb. "You've done so well for yourself," my mother said between bites. "Much better than we expected back then. Imagine what you could do if you had real guidance," my father added. "We always knew you had potential, but you were too stubborn to take advice." I smiled politely, letting the words roll past me. The meal went on, each course layered with false warmth, but as the plates cleared and dessert appeared, the shift came. My mother set down her fork and folded her hands together. "Corinna, we wanted to talk with you about something important." My father leaned forward, his voice lowering. "The truth is, we've hit a rough patch. Nothing we can't fix. Of course, but it would go faster with your help." I held my breath, waiting. "We need 200,000, my mother said quickly, as if ripping off a bandage, "to steady things, to save the family. You can do that for us. Can't you after all? We're family." Their eyes were fixed on me, hungry and expectant, as though the entire evening had been leading to this single moment. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward them. Their chatter stilled, eyes darting between each other and the plain manila cover. "What's this?" my father asked, his voice cautious. "Open it," I said, keeping my tone even. My mother's fingers trembled as she flipped it open. The color drained from her face as she skimmed the first-page mortgage records. Overdue notices, lawsuit filings. She turned another page, then another, each one worse than the last. My father leaned over, his jaw tightening when he saw the notations about the missing community fund money. "I know everything," I said quietly. "The debts, the lawsuits, the donations that disappeared under your watch. I know the empire you parade around town is built on sand." For a moment, they were silent, stunned. Then the flood began. My mother's voice cracked with desperation. "Corinna, please, you don't understand. We were trying to keep everything afloat. We didn't want you to see us like this." My father's face hardened. "Who fed you this? You've always been too nosy for your own good." I stayed still, letting them unravel. My mother shifted from begging to sobbing, tears smearing her careful makeup. My father swung between denial and fury, slamming a fist against the table, then demanding I reconsider. I leaned back in my chair, watching their performance without flinching. Finally, I spoke. "My surprise for you is simple. I won't be your savior. Not now. Not ever." Their pleas filled the room, but I stood, gathering my bag. The folder remained on the table like a mirror reflecting everything they had tried to hide. I turned toward the door, ready to leave them with the truth they could no longer escape. Their voices rose behind me, a storm of accusations and pleas chasing me toward the door. My mother's sobs tangled with my father's sharp commands, but none of it reached me the way it once would have. I slipped my coat on slowly, every button fastening with calm finality, and stepped into the hallway. The dining room lights spilled into the entryway, but I didn't turn back. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to be wanted by them again, to hear my name spoken with warmth. Now I knew the truth that their love had conditions, that their welcome had a price tag. The night air met me as I stepped outside, crisp and clear, a silence deeper than the noise inside. Their shouts muffled as the door clicked shut behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt no urge to return, no guilt pulling me back. I walked down the driveway, my heels crunching on the thin frost forming over the pavement with each step. The weight that had lived in my chest for 10 years began to lift. I no longer carried the need for their approval, or the ache of unanswered questions. At the curb, I paused, breathing in the stillness of the quiet neighborhood. I thought of the life I had built, the strength I had forged from abandonment, and the peace that came from choosing myself. Then I turned toward the dark street and walked on,